I think that is one of the challenges of being a smaller firm. We don't always spend enough time, or we don't necessarily have the resources to really focus on that tech stack. And as there's just more and more technologies emerging, it's hard to keep up, let alone to really have the time to dig in and understand how those types of things may be able to help. So I think that's a challenge of being a smaller firm. And a big advantage of being a bigger firm is you've got not just budget, but you've got people that have the skills to really help understand how do you build the tech stack that is most effective for you and your firm.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Connected Advisor. I'm your host, Kyle Van Pelt, co-founder and CEO of Milemarker. And today I am joined by Mark Weiskind. Mark is the founding partner and president of Fairway Wealth. I love the name. And he is a long-suffering Cleveland sports fan. Mark, thanks so much for taking time to join the show.
Yeah, Kyle, good to be here with you this morning.
Absolutely. So which Cleveland sports team do you think has provided the most suffering for you over your time?
It's the Browns. Easy. All of them have, but the Browns have been just putrid. And every time they get us a little excited about maybe this, things turn in the other direction, something goes wrong. We're now dealing with Deshaun Watson in fall cases again. So I've gotten one championship in my life. LeBron got us one in 2016. But other than that, the Indians lost Game 7 of the World Series in extra innings twice in my lifetime. So it's tough place to be. Tough place to be born.
Yeah, and that Deshaun Watson contract, remains to be seen what's going to end up happening there. But as of right now, it's not looking too great.
Not good. No.
Man. Well, at least, the Guardians seem like they're having a great year. They look like a really solid squad. So
they're a great organization, actually. They win despite the lack of resources that a lot of the other organizations have, but they still haven't been able to sort of get over the hump and win a World Series. So fingers crossed.
Yeah. I love it, man. I could talk to you about sports and baseball all day, but let's dive in a little bit to some industry stuff. But Mark, I start every one of these podcasts off with the same first question, and this is not going to be any different. So I found everybody has their own unique path to this space. Some people, it might be really traditional. Maybe they followed in family members' footsteps or something like that. Some people, maybe they came in through the side door of the industry and maybe they're doing something completely different and something happened and caused them to get in here. But whether that path was traditional or untraditional, I've found that every single person who works in this space has what I like to refer to as a money moment. And that money moment is something where they're going along about their lives and something happens and it clicks. And this is what they want to do, spend their time in their career helping people with financial planning, helping people with these resources. So Mark, for you, what was that money moment that led you to be in an RIA?
Great, interesting question. So I guess quick background is I started my career as an auditor at Deloitte & Touche. I was an accounting and finance major in college. I was one of those people, I was fortunate to have a job as an auditor before I'd even taken an auditing class. So I didn't really even know what I was getting into. I just sort of fell into accounting. I spent 3 years at Deloitte. I was doing well, but I realized I just didn't like what I was doing. There's just this disconnect between what I was doing, the work I was doing, and actually feeling like there was value or I was helping anybody. So I'm in that sort of position where I'm like, I don't really know what I want to do. There was a night where I was just laying in bed. It's one of those nights where your mind starts wandering. It's 3 a.m. and you can't get back to sleep. I kind of call it my little epiphany of, gosh, I think I really would like to get into wealth management. I'd had some interest and experience doing some investing for myself. I love this idea of being able to work with people, have a direct impact on an end client. I remember laying there in bed going, I think Deloitte should be in this business. Like, why aren't we in this business? We've got all these tax clients, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm like, I need to go to the partners and tell them I'm the guy, we should start this business. And little did I know, at the time, the Big Six at the time, and Deloitte included, had already registered with the SEC to get into the RIA business. The business was already being launched. But anyway, that was sort of my moment of like, this is what I want to do. I was looking for jobs elsewhere. I was fortunate enough to be able to transition right there within Deloitte to kind of get into this business. But that was it.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that you call it your little epiphany. I actually want to maybe take a second and talk about that. I know most of the people who listen to this podcast are people who maybe already own RIAs or things like that. But I also happen to know there's a handful of folks who are either really early in their career, kind of thinking about, going and finding their first job out of college, things like that. And I think it's pretty traditional advice to go to like a big four accounting place or a consulting place or something like that, right? If you get into a good school, maybe you try to go to a Bain or a Boston Consulting Group or a Deloitte. You still think that was a good path to take on the start? Or do you think the world has changed enough that, you wish maybe you had done something different?
I think it was great, right? Because I think you get great training. You start to build a network while you're there, right? Because it is a big organization and you get some experiences and some different things. Like I know we as an employer, at least for the type of work we do, we love hiring people that have a couple of years of experience. For us, we'll maybe get into it later, but we're really focused on taxes and tax planning as part of what we do. So if we can hire someone that's got a couple of years of accounting experience in public accounting and they've got a little bit of that tax background, that is super valuable. And we found it's a lot easier to train someone on sort of investing in investment concepts than it is on taxes and tax concepts. I think it's a great place for someone to start their career. Well
stated. I love that. I love to hear that, because sometimes I think people feel like maybe not that they wasted time at those big places, right? But you're like, I feel like I was just on the path that everybody put me on. And I get there and I wake up one day and I'm like, what was I doing here? Right.
Yeah. Because the trick is it's probably not the end game for most people. Right. It's likely not where they're going to spend their entire careers. And I'll say this for myself too. Like I didn't necessarily like the work I was doing at the beginning. Right. So I look back and I can say it was valuable that I did it and it was valuable that I spent that time there, but it wasn't the type of work I wanted to do. And I think that's what's hard. That's the disconnect. Right.
Yeah. Well stated, man. I appreciate you sharing that. So one of the guiding principles that we found for Fairway Wealth is to provide reliable value. And I think anybody would want to do that, but you make a note of calling that out in a lot of your materials and a lot of your different things. How would you define reliable value?
Yeah. So I think for most firms in our industry, right, the value proposition is based off of aspirational concepts and predictions and things that the investor and even the advisor don't have any control over, right? Yeah. So the value proposition is in beating markets and predicting the direction of markets and, what's going on in geopolitics, or I've got it into the very best managers. And if you're making decisions based off of predictions about the future, our opinion, I don't care how big of an expert you are, they're not reliable, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lack of, you can't predict that those predictions aren't necessarily going to come true.
Yeah.
There's no accountability down the road. The prediction you made 18 months ago, if it didn't come true, that's sort of lost in the shuffle. So the client, the consumer ends up, their value is a function of the ability of those people to make decisions based on those predictions. Okay. And we think that's totally unreliable in being consistent with providing value. So we focus on things that are controllable, where the value is reliable and it's consistent. And so like we talk about taxes and tax efficiency all the time, right? It doesn't matter what direction the market's going. There is value there in being diligent about tax management, tax location, those types of things. We index a lot and we've been direct indexing for basically since we founded the firm. So there's reliable value there irrespective of what's going on in the environment around us. We focus on costs. We've got control of those things. Reducing costs is a reliable way to add value. Behavior. People make behavioral mistakes all the time. And again, I think it's understated, but sometimes the biggest value an advisor can bring to the table is keeping the client from doing something stupid. We're big believers in having a consolidated, coordinated investment strategy to rebalance regularly. We can provide value in a reliable and consistent manner and not be a function of some prediction about something in the future. So that's sort of conceptually what we talk about as reliable value.
That's great because the markets are anything but reliable, as you state, right? I think that's really interesting. Well, they're anything but short-term reliable, right? I think the markets are pretty long-term reliable. So to correct myself there.
Like we're big believers in mean reversion. We love the equity markets. We think there's, continued upside there. But again, the value is in having a long-term strategy, right? And not in having the value be reliant on short-term predictions. And we talk about that with our clients all the time. We should never have your long-term success be predicated on anybody's short-term predictions, including our own.
That's good. I like the way you put that. So we've talked a little bit about Deloitte and how that helped you with some tax prep. And then, you talked about how that's part of reliable value as taxes there. I think one of the conversations I have with people now is, that I think there's a phrase that I kind of like, which is like tax is the only place where there's any alpha left, right? For a lot of people, because most of the asset allocation strategies and all of that stuff, you're either indexing against something or you're doing a lot of these things. Maybe you try and take some swings at alternative investments or whatever, but reliable alpha is found in good asset location, tax planning, and those types of things. I mean, would you agree with that statement or disagree?
That is right in the heart of our belief. Yeah, I believe it wholeheartedly, right? Not that there isn't value in management and active management. You can do it, but it is hard to be successful on a consistent basis. And especially if you're working with high net worth investors that have to pay taxes, that hurdle on an after-tax basis is sizable, right? The world of direct indexing has continued to grow and evolve. And again, if I can add, a 0.5% or percent, or in some cases, a couple percent in after-tax value just through tax loss management, it is really tough to beat that bogey. Asset location, we talk about all the time, right? We too often see portfolios where people own the same stuff in all of their accounts, right? And it's like, if we just put this over here and, in your IRA and we move this over here, there's, again, reliable value. It's a given, it's a guarantee versus being right or wrong about the stock we did or didn't pick.
Yeah. For a lot of the RIAs listening to this, they'll probably know exactly what this is. This is a personal curiosity question for me. But let's say you have somebody who comes in and they've already got a portfolio that a pretty decent advisor put together for them. It's not one of these horror story portfolios that we've seen, a lot of people come in with that are always terrifying. But if they did a decent job. But when you look at it and you say, hey, if we did locate these differently, if we did change these differently, we could have a lot better tax implications. Do you trigger short-term penalties when you're trying to rearrange where these things are located? Or mechanically, what happens if you're trying to move this asset from, this type of account to this type of account, or change the locations of things for tax purposes?
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer is no. So especially if there are tax consequences, if we've got to recognize, and this is the case really with any implementation with a new client, if there are sizable tax costs to get to where we want to be, then we may try to get there over time eventually, but we can't get there immediately because we can never recoup the tax cost of that.
Right.
And again, I think that's just putting a tax lens on every decision that you're making is I've got to be able to overcome whatever that tax burden is. But if someone's got money in their IRA, let's just say, and they've got, I sometimes will use the example of like they've got an index fund in their IRA and they've got a real estate fund in their taxable account. It's like, how can we get that real estate position into that IRA to defer the tax on all of that income, tax at ordinary income tax rates? I can swap out of that index fund into the real estate fund within the IRA, but I may not be able to, on the flip side, get my allocation exactly where I want it to be, because there's tax consequences in the non-IRA accounts. But you've got to pay attention to that. I think that's where, in our business, we work with a relatively small number of clients. Things are very customized. And so we're not running models in the same way that some firms are. So we can be very, very sort of one-off in how we do the management of one portfolio versus another.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for humoring me on that. I think that makes sense, right? Because I could totally understand somebody coming in and saying, yeah, Mark, I would love to have this all tax optimized, right? But it's going to trigger some massive tax bill, right? Isn't that what we're trying to avoid? And so I like how you're saying, hey, we're always just going to look at it, right? Sometimes it might not make sense. Sometimes it might make sense to draw that out over a couple of years.
If you're looking at things from a sort of a holistic standpoint, you find opportunities. I use the example of someone in that situation, but maybe they've also got some philanthropic or charitable goals. And so we can say, well, hey, you've got these low basis positions in this taxable account. Why don't we set up a donor advised fund? Why don't we contribute some of these low basis positions into that donor advised fund to meet your long-term charitable goals? And then that gives us a little more of ability then to reconstruct the portfolio. And we've eliminated some of the underlying capital gain costs, but also then built in some of the rest of your planning right on the charitable side. So it's sort of looking at things from multiple angles and with multiple lenses. Again, reliable value, right? You can really provide that kind of value.
That's good. So I love this conversation so far. Some of it was from my own curiosity, but also some of it is highlighting your comment around providing reliable value. And I also think one of the big conversations going on in the industry, has been for a little while, is people call it the fee compression conversation, but I actually think it was more of the additional value provided for the fees that you get conversation. That's just not as catchy as saying fee compression, right? I think even as I look at what has happened, we went as an industry from having brokers where, you would just call this person to buy a certain stock for you or something. They weren't really doing any type of planning or anything like that, but everything was account based. You would call, they would take care of your business for you there. And then maybe they moved into a place where it still wasn't necessarily planning, but we got away from individual positions more into mutual funds and buying these things where you're going to bucket your money. And then all of a sudden you had this big wave of, hey, if I go get a CFP, call myself a fiduciary, I can really differentiate against the rest of these folks, and I'm going to do some planning. Now I feel like almost everybody is some sort of fee only or fee-based CFP, fiduciary. And it seems now like the way of people trying to differentiate is, hey, we don't just do financial planning, but we do either holistic financial planning, or we're bringing a tax lens, we're bringing estate, we're bringing a lot of this stuff in, all for the same fees. So the fees didn't ever really go down per se, but the expectation now is that you're just having to do more and more for that. How have you seen that evolve in your career and how you've done things?
I think you're pretty spot on there. Like, I think interestingly, Fairway as a firm right out of the get-go has generally provided more service than most advisors at a pretty competitive fee. We've always sort of put our stake in the ground that we are providing sort of that holistic advice, right? The roots in the accounting firm and taxes and tax planning has sort of been inherent in our DNA. I think one of the keys right now is you've got to be a client service organization and provide sort of that exceptional level of service as part of your value proposition. So all the things we're hearing in the industry that they say are important, so taxes and estate planning and risk management and helping with debt and financing and, corporate exec, stock option, restricted stock kind of planning, even bill paying and things like that. What I often will call sort of nuts and bolts financial planning, just like running the numbers and assessing goals and helping people sort of understand where they're at. I think that's table stakes today to be able to work with, especially at the high net worth level. And those that are really doing it are going to be successful. I think in our case, we've been doing a lot of that. And so we haven't been feeling that fee pressure. Right? If you're just mainly focused on investment management and that's your value proposition, I think that's become hard, or that's where fees are really, really getting pushed down. There's more places we're continuing to look on the value added side, healthcare planning and Medicare planning and things like that. We're getting questions about help with art and things like that. We may get a little bit of fee pressure. If you're charging 1% or 1.25% and all you're doing is investment management, you better rethink, in my opinion.
Yeah. That's good. You kind of alluded to it there, but do you have clients who are coming in and saying, hey, Mark, you're doing a great job, but look, I see all these other things that are out there or whatever, like, can I get a break on my fees or things like that? Are those conversations happening at Fairway?
It's pretty rare. Occasionally a client will ask a question and occasionally, we'll see someone and let's say they'll talk to Vanguard, right? And Vanguard, we're going to do this for 30 basis points. And occasionally we'll have to sort of remind the client again, what that value proposition is. And like, here's what we're actually doing. And if you can find what we're doing somewhere else, please let us know at a comparable fee. Another important point for everybody is just the more involved and the more deeply rooted you can get in that client relationship. Fees don't always matter, right? There's a breaking point, certainly, where they'll matter. But as long as you've got a reasonable fee and you're providing a level of service that's exceptional and you're providing value and you've got clients that have that trust, I don't think we're going to see, all of a sudden fees compress completely if you're providing sort of that level of service.
Well stated, man. I like that a lot. So we've talked about being able to provide reliable value and what that looks like. We've talked about sort of these additional services as a means of providing that reliable value, which I love. But when I think about that, I think about the resources that are needed to do something like that. When one of the big trends in the space, obviously, is consolidation. There's a lot of people who are kind of plugging into bigger platforms, but people don't necessarily want to be at wirehouses or anything anymore. I'm just trying to think about how a smaller firm could offer all of this estate planning stuff or the tax planning stuff or all this holistic planning. I mean, there's a ton of work to be done for all of this to keep jumping over that bar that's been set.
Yeah.
How would somebody be able to do that without joining one of these big platforms or consolidators?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And even more so for a firm like us today. So we're a Focus financial partner firm. We did a transaction with Focus back in the end of 2020. Over the past year, as the ownership of the Focus holding company has changed, there's been a good bit of consolidation even amongst the firms within Focus. So I've got kind of mixed feelings on this topic. I look at it both ways because I do recognize the benefit of size and scale, especially with things like technology and having dedicated firm management and bigger marketing budgets, multiple career paths for employees. There's absolutely a benefit of that. I'm still a bit skeptical that bigger is better, right? You can make an argument either way, but we're in a service business and our value is in our people and those people providing, really excellent, exceptional service and highly skilled counsel to our clients. And so the co-founder of my business, his name's Dan Glogler, and he would often use the word, and still does, our secret sauce, right? And this is our secret sauce. And some of that secret sauce has always been, at least for us, that the senior people within the firm have continued to be really active in advisory roles with clients, right? And the senior people in the firm have been the ones that are teaching and mentoring the less experienced advisors as they've sort of worked their way up. And so sort of teaching them the Fairway way. So we've got 8, what we call wealth managers, those that are providing primary advice to clients. Of those 8, 7 are either the founders or they sort of grew up within the firm. I think the way to succeed is, again, being hands-on and really just serving the heck out of your clients. And as a small boutique firm, if you can do that in an exceptional way, there's some risk that the bigger firms have a harder time doing that because, again, I'm using my example my days at Deloitte. Like there's always this push to push work down to the next level so that the higher levels can focus on other things, right? And so there's the risk that you don't have the most experienced people and the best people providing all of the advice to the clients. And I think there's risk there. And so I think that's a way to sort of differentiate yourself as an advisor is you could be small as long as you provide exceptional services and you build those relationships. Other interesting point, I think, sort of popped into my head, but when we were at Deloitte, or when we left Deloitte to found Fairway, one of sort of the eye-openers was at the big firm, all of our information sort of came within that Deloitte echo chamber, right? And there were great resources there. But when we left, all of a sudden, you've got this whole world of people out there providing you information with lots of perspectives. And you realize, again, I didn't need to be in the big firm to be successful in our industry. So again, I think if you stay small, you're going to have to be exceptional, right? You're going to have to be really good at what you do. You're going to have to find a niche if there's a niche, because the big firms are only going to get better. And we're not now competing against, the big banks and the big brokerage firms, but now you're competing against RIAs with service models that look very much like ours. I think one other thought real quick, Kyle, on that is employee experience, right? I think at some level, as firms get bigger, you end up with some level of bureaucracy and rules and maybe a little narrowing of career paths or job roles. Equity ownership, becomes trickier. And so I think another place smaller firms can succeed is, and you've got to keep your people, right, is making your firm a really good place to work, making it both fun, feeling like you're part of the organization in a way that you maybe don't feel in a bigger firm, that you're important, that maybe you wear multiple hats. And so you might be able to attract people who've been at the mothership and the big firm and say, I'd really like to feel a little more part of a family-oriented type of organization.
For sure. Yeah, that's really well stated, because I do think that that's true. No matter how big an organization gets or how much they want to fight against that, just the inherent nature of having to run something that has lots of people on it, you have to make trade-offs and choices for what that's going to look like. And everybody talks about the analogy of being on a speedboat versus a big old naval carrier, right? You can't turn a naval carrier around as fast as you can turn a speedboat around. It's not the same. But, you also can do a whole heck of a lot more from a naval carrier than you can a speedboat, right? And so always trade-offs for sure. But you're exactly right that there's going to be people who would much rather have more fun in that speedboat, even if it's maybe a little bit riskier or maybe you can't do as much than, being one of the hundreds of people or thousands of people on the naval carrier.
That's right. But you better be a good driver of that speedboat, right?
Yes. Being on the speedboat's a lot less fun if the person driving it just, keeps crashing into stuff or they keep throwing you out of the boat or anything like that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well stated, man.
This podcast is brought to you by Termcast. We make game-changing content for fintech and financial services companies. Learn more at turncast.com.
All right. So one thing we haven't talked a little bit about, and Milemarker is a technology firm. I think technology in this space is changing all the time, but this is a question I've kind of enjoyed asking people lately. So I think any successful firm has had and will continue to have what I call the core four of their technology stack. It's the custodians, portfolio management, CRM, and financial planning software.
Yep.
Almost anybody that I see who's really having a lot of success always kind of has a strategy around those four. But obviously, with the rise and all of these different things that people are offering and stuff like that, my question, I guess, to you and that I've been asking other people is the core four as a concept kind of outdated? Is there now some other stuff that are really, kind of required to be part of the tech stack to have a successful firm? Or do you think you could still run a successful firm on the core four alone?
I think the core four is still the core four in terms of importance. The other piece of that is the client end, right? And that client portal that I think is important and will become more and more important. And I think that's an area I don't think anyone's really sort of found that silver bullet, that single portal that can do everything and really provide the experience that the client might seek. I think that is one of the challenges of being a smaller firm, right? In a boutique firm, is that we don't always spend enough time, or we don't necessarily have the resources to really focus on that tech stack. And as there's just more and more technologies emerging, it's hard to keep up, let alone to really have the time to dig in and understand how those types of things may be able to help. So I think that's a challenge of being a smaller firm. And a big advantage of being a bigger firm is you've got not just budget, but you've got people that have the skills to really help understand how do you build the tech stack that is most effective for you and your firm.
That is actually a sneaky, insightful comment that you just made, because I think so many people look at technology from the spend of actually buying the product itself, maybe the implementation and the hopes that it's going to make them more efficient or things like that. But that is a pain point that we've heard from a lot of people is you need somebody who's going to understand how to do this, because advisors don't have the time to get the PhD in how to run a lot of these systems. And the people running the firms got, a million things on their plate. They can't be experts in some of this technology. And so you either kind of keep going along with a half-baked implementation of what this thing looks like, or you've got people who aren't adopting or utilizing it as much as they can because of kind of the lack of a pilot person for that, manning those pieces of technology.
We've given people some more dedicated responsibilities to have ownership, whether it's our CRM or portfolio management system. But again, it's still a part-time job for those folks in our world today. And so that is a challenge. We made a pretty big investment a couple of years ago in our CRM and, in particular, kind of bringing pretty much all of our sort of day-to-day processes into the CRM in a much more organized way than we'd ever done previous. But we're like most, I think, in that we've got more technology capability than we're using. But on the flip side, we're still doing plenty of things in Excel. And some of it is because we're doing a lot of pretty customized work for a lot of our clients that it's hard to plug that into a off-the-shelf, technology solution. And we're talking to our vendors about, how can we integrate some of these things maybe we're doing sort of outside the technology into the technology. But it's hard to again, find the time, right? Until you eventually decide I need to invest in someone that's CTO kind of role to really drive that process.
Okay, I'm curious. You piqued my interest. Talk to me about some of the things that you all are still kind of running through Excel, even though you're investing all this money in technology and stuff. Because I think this is like one of the things that plagues our industry, right? Is people like you go and spend all of this money on technology, and the technology is good. Okay, we need to stop the technology bashing. It does the job that it's supposed to do in a lot of ways. But I think because problems in our industry are not linear, everybody is still supplementing all of these pieces of tech and the spend with Excel and things like that. So you don't have to go too detailed and you don't have to share any of the secret sauce, but just talk to me about some of the functions or the jobs to be done that are being done through Excel still.
Yeah, I'll give you one example that we do all the time is we do a pretty comprehensive net worth statement for our clients. And some of them are relatively simple, but some of them are pretty complex because they've got, trusts and generation skipping things. And we sort of try to model what's in the estate and what's out of the estate. And we're still doing that all in Excel. Okay. And we can build some of that into the, portfolio management system. And we've talked to other vendors who maybe we can do more than what we're doing, but we haven't been able to sort of really replicate yet what we're doing in Excel. And it's an important part of our process. Okay. That's a goal of ours, is to be able to integrate and take, because again, every quarter we're going in and someone's manually entering data into Excel, right? And so that's a good example of something. I know the capabilities there, but not exactly like what we want. So can we get someone to help really build that in? Because it's not as, some of the things we've seen they're good for the right situation, but they're a little too simplistic for what we're trying to do for our client.
Yeah, we see that type of stuff every single day, right? I've heard you talk a little bit about the client experience and things like that. I think it's just such a challenge in our space. And I'm going to empathize with the technology providers and things as well, right? Because, every RIA wants to provide a different type of client experience. Like there is no sort of mass market client portal that you can really create. And we've seen people try. And the problem is nobody really utilizes them or adopts them because, it's fine, but it's this, right? Or as you just stated, like, yeah, the portal's good, but I've still got to create this net worth statement on Excel or whatever else. Not to mention, and I always joke with advisors about this, you invest a lot of money in this client portal and your client's still using Personal Capital or Mint not Mint anymore because they shut down, but they've probably got something on their phone that they're looking at personally.
I think that's just an interesting point, because what we've found is, at least for our clients, we can't always even get them to implement the technology. Right. And I don't know if it's the types of clients we work with or, our clients, they maybe skew a little older than normal, but we've got clients kind of all across the spectrum. Maybe it's that we just do so much for them that they don't have to or want to use the technology, but we struggle to get the majority of our clients to even use the tools we have, which also then prompts us to say, how much do we invest in trying to sort of build this perfect portal? And there's obviously costs associated with that if our clients aren't going to use it. And again, try to balance that with, well, that's today, but what are things going to look like 10 years from now, right? And those are the conversations we're having all the time internally.
Totally, man. Totally. All right. Well, speaking of this, let's go ahead and move into one of my favorite segments of the show. I'm going to ask you, Mark, to get out your crystal ball, look into the future a little bit. Doesn't have to be technology focused because we've already talked about tech a little bit, but where do you see the industry going? What are some of the trends that you see coming down the pike? And what do you see for the future of our space?
Yeah, good question. I certainly think we're going to continue to see the fiduciary RIA model grow and thrive. I think the industry is going to continue to move more and more in that direction. And as some of these larger RIAs continue to grow, maybe builds name recognition, right? I think that should only increase as the consumer's knowledge of the space increases. Because I'm still surprised at how many consumers out there, clients out there don't even know firms like ours even exist, let alone know what we actually do and how we're differentiated. So I think the industry is going to just continue to move more and more in that direction. We talked about it already, but continued demand for more and more services, things like tax prep and planning and bill paying and estate planning. Again, I think that kind of stuff becomes table stakes. We'll definitely continue to see more and more consolidation. In some cases, it's the money at the end of the day is just too good for owners to ignore. There's a lot of money being thrown around out there. And I think there's a lot of firms that still haven't figured out their succession plans and developed that next generation of advisors and owners. So I do think we're going to continue to see consolidation, but I'm not one of those that feels like we're going to end up with 20 mega firms and that's it. I'm curious to see how far that consolidation and scale goes, because I think we've been like the RIA space has generally been run by firm owners, people like me, that they love serving clients. They like making a difference in people's lives. And yeah, we want to make money, but maybe profit maximization isn't the most important thing. And so I still think you're going to have a lot of people that still want to sort of do things the way they want to do in their sort of idealistic way, and where serving the client and having the right sort of that lifestyle is as or more important than maybe making the last buck or going to work for the bigger company. I'm not one that believes we're going to end up with, just a small number of firms. I think we're going to continue to see plenty of small firms and eventually people continuing to break away from some of these bigger firms and do their own thing.
All right. Thank you for sharing. That's good. I actually liked your insight about maybe we're not going to have 20 big mega firms, because I do feel like I've kind of heard that. That seems to be a pretty constant belief, is that people think we're going to end up with a handful of super regional RIAs. They're just going to get big and brand worthy and people are going to know who they are. So it's interesting to hear you say like maybe, but probably not all the way.
I think we're going to see some of that. I still think there are going to be, a lot of people who still sort of want to control their own destiny. I'm interested to see this. In my mind, I've sort of played out this, as bigger firms, they're public companies, they're owned by, private equity. And does the priority shift away from the clients and the people within the firm, right? The duty of the owner now is to be the best interest of shareholders or fund holders. We're maximizing profit, and share price is sort of the number one priority. The risk is that all of a sudden these RIAs start feeling like banks or like brokerage firms.
Yeah.
Right. And if that does happen, then I think you're going to see people, again, want to break away and do their own thing. So I hope, and I think there'll be firms that can maintain that sort of entrepreneurial ownership feel of that smaller RIA and still be the big firm. I think that's what Focus is trying to create. Some others are trying to create, but I'm skeptical that all the consolidators are going to be able to achieve that.
Awesome. All right, let's move into the final segment of the show. We call this the Milemarker Minute. It's a series of lightning round questions, typically a little more lighthearted, getting to know you a little bit outside of Fairway Wealth. So are you ready to rock and roll?
Let's do it.
Okay, perfect. All right, my first question for you. If you could travel anywhere in the world that you've never been to before, where would you go?
I think Italy's at the top of the list now. Have never been there, and we're in the midst of making plans to go there probably sometime next year. So I would say, all over Italy, it's probably top of the list.
Awesome. We've talked about the heartbreaking nature of being a Cleveland sports fan, but sell us Cleveland. What is the charming and the heartwarming stuff about Cleveland that makes it great?
Cleveland is a wonderful town. I think like a lot of Midwest cities, good people. People are friendly. People are very vested in their city, right? Proud of their city. Cleveland's got a lot of, I think, unrealized resources, right? We're right on Lake Erie. There's a thriving theater district. I think Cleveland's got the biggest theater district in the country outside of New York City. You've got these great sports teams. Cost of living is attractive. If it wasn't for the winter, Cleveland would be a great place. I'm looking out the window today, and it's sunny and beautiful. It's wonderful here from say May 15th until October 15th. But I will say the winters in Cleveland and the gray skies are probably the biggest negative. Cleveland's one of those cities, whenever someone comes to Cleveland, they go, wow, I had no idea. Like Cleveland's a pretty cool city. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's here. That's always an attraction. There's a little more going on than I think people might recognize.
Yeah, I think it was Drew Carey one time who said that Cleveland rocks.
Right. Right. I'm not going to sing the song, but yeah.
Mark, is Kenny Lofton the most underrated leadoff hitter of all time?
Ooh, that's a great question. Maybe.
Do you think that Boston gets to take credit for what Cleveland did to launch Manny Ramirez's career and success?
No, I think Manny earned it all on his own. I think Cleveland still looks at Manny as he's a Clevelander, despite his years in Boston.
I love it, man. As the president of Fairway Wealth, I have to imagine you like to play golf. Is there a golf course on your bucket list that you've not been able to play yet that you would love to play?
Oh my gosh, there's so many of them. I think going to Scotland and Ireland is still at the top of the list, and doing St. Andrews. I crossed one of them off the bucket list last week. I was in Kohler, Wisconsin, playing Whistling Straits and some of the other courses there with some friends. So that was an awesome experience. If anyone's interested and wants to go there, great golf trip. But there's a lot of them, but I'd say going to the home of golf is probably at the top of the list.
Awesome. All right, 2 more questions for you. RIAs acquiring tax prep firms. Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
See, it's a great question. We talk about it. I think it's more of a bad thing. I think partnering makes more sense. They're just different businesses, and the tax prep work takes away from the value propositions. You've got to continue to run them as separate businesses, I think would be my counsel there.
Yeah. Okay. And then my final question for you, if you were not running an RIA and you were not a financial advisor and you were to go down a different career path, what career path do you think you would have taken instead?
Well, I was going to be an attorney when I first started school. Maybe would have done that if, but I don't know today. Working in a golf pro shop and getting to play a lot of golf might be up there.
That's awesome. All right, Mark. That is the end of the Milemarker Minute. Sadly, we have come to the end of the show. I love some of the insights that you dropped today. I had a lot of fun with this conversation. So thank you so much for carving out some time today to come and speak to the Connected Advisor audience.
Yeah, Kyle, thanks. Appreciate you having me. It's fun.
Absolutely. Likewise. All right, everybody. That's been another episode of the Connected Advisor podcast. Please make sure you click like or subscribe or follow wherever it is that you are paying attention to this so that you'll be notified of the next great conversation like the one we just had with Mark. And if you would be so kind to leave us a review, I would greatly appreciate it. as it really helps to get this into the hands of other people. But until then, we'll catch you on the next episode.